So let's begin. This is the end of the first parak, and we're going to start the second parak. Bez Hashem. Gemara brought a little bit of agadata about mamzerus and psulei kol. Gemara says, "Amar Rabbi Kahana." The Navi says in Melachim, "Vayanchim b'chalach b'chibur hanor goes in v'orim adechalach." What is that king, the Assyrian king Melech Ashur, took the 10 Shvatim away from Klal Yisrael, from Eretz Yisrael, and brought them down Chalach and Chibur. So what is Chalach? Ze Chalzon. I don't know what that place is. V'chibur zu Chadiyab. Now Chadiyab is a unique place. It is in northern Iran, and I think it's Adiyabin is what the English name is, and there was a kingdom there, and uniquely and relevant to the next Gemara of whether the people there are no longer Jews, as even though that they are from the Aseret Hashvatim, whether they count as non-Jews. We have famous converts, and basically the entire kingdom converted with their queen, Helene Amalka, who shows up in the Gemara many times, and one of the Chachamim, that we bring halacha from, in Machlokes between Munabaz and the Chachamim. Munabaz was the king of Chadiyab. The Helene was the wife, or the widow of Munabaz the first, and her son Munabaz the second became king afterwards. They lived at the end of the first of the second Beis Hamikdash. The Gemara brings halachas about them, Helene Amalka and her children, and she converted herself and her children, and her son who became king after her, Munabaz, was also a Jew, and they built, they beautified the entrance to the Beis Hamikdash towards the end of the Beis Hamikdash, and they donated a lot of money during the siege of Yerushalayim, and their son and the king Munabaz financed almost single-handedly Bar Kokhba's revolt. So they were kings out in the northern Iranian province, and converted to Judaism. They converted together with most of the nation. Why is this? I mean, it's a nice historical thing, and the Gemara says that Chavar is Chadiyab, but it's relevant because in the next lines the Gemara is going to deal with whether or not these places that Klal Yisrael's 10 Shvatim went to, whether we can assume they're still Jewish or they're no longer Jewish. And the Gemara is going to have multiple reasons why they would not be Jewish anymore. And here we have clearly that they had to go through the Chachamim Paskin, that they had to go through a conversion, and the conversion worked, and they were not considered Mamzerim, even though that they are essentially descendant of the Aseret Hashvatim. And now it goes as a Ginzak. The Gemara later tells the story of Ginzak, and the people of Ginzak were not so happy with the Rabbi Akiva. Ginzak v'ari Madai, in the cities of Madai Zuchamda v'Chavrisel. V'amar lazu nihar v'Chavrisel. Okay. Now man Omar Shmuel Karach Moshri Chidki v'Dumki. So Amar Rabbi Yechon v'Kulon l'Psul. So these are Shmuel says all these places are puzzle. He bound them together. He bundled them as ki Amrita Kameda Shmuel, and he said it in front of Shmuel. So all this Rabbi Yehuda is saying, and he's saying that these are all puzzle places, and he quotes that in Rabbi Yochanan. Shmuel says Amar Lei. Shmuel said back to him. Bincha habam in Israel is kora bincha. The ein bincha habam in Aved is kachavim kora bincha. He says no, these are not puzzle people. These are not Jews that have a psul of mamzerus. These are non-Jews. All the people from these places are no longer considered Jewish because they intermarry, and you need a Jewish mother to be counted as a Jewish, and if the father is Jewish and the mother is not, it doesn't count as a Jew. Bincha haba min Yisrael is kara bincha. Vein bincha haba min oivedas kechavim kara bincha elabana. So Gemara says, yeah, but they had daughters. Gemara says, actually, the daughters could not give birth, and so there were no children from Jewish women. They were only children from non-Jewish women. So all these people were not Jewish. That's the first shot in the Gemara. Shmamina ben, and even the grandchildren. Shmamina ben bitcha. It counts, and the Gemara is going to explain that. Rashi is going to explain that. And Tis is going to ask a kasha on Rashi from this. That the Gemara now says, Shmamina, we can learn that your daughter's son is considered a Jew. Which Tis is going to ask, of course, it's born to a Jewish mother. Why would you think not? Mir the Banata, it's the story, they couldn't give birth. Ikadamri, those who say, Shmuel, Amalei, that they were in Chazal considered them of non-Jews completely, and they were no longer valid, even though that they were descendants of Jewish mothers. They were considered not Jewish. Shenemar, as it says, Bashem Bagadu, they rebelled against Hashem, Kibanim Zaru Zarim Yalad, because they gave birth to foreign children, meaning their children were no longer considered Jewish. So we have machlokes over here of whether or not this was based upon the concept that paternal lineage doesn't count as a Jew, and therefore the Asar Shvatim are not Jewish, or do we say that no, that really the Asar Shvatim were Jewish, but it was enacted by the Chachamim that they are no longer considered Jewish, and then we're going to have to understand on the basis of what happens. Yisrael. Generally, we say a Yid, even though that he sinned, even though he did Aveira, he's still a Yid. So, first to the first aspect, Rashi learns for the way the pasuk is darshan is this way. It says in the pasuk, don't allow bitcha l'sita l'bnai, and don't take his son for your daughters. Right. So, in other words, don't let your children intermarry. Don't intermarry your children to non-Jews. Why? Because because perhaps they will remove your son from me. Now, what does it mean, your son? So Rashi learns it means your grandson. Your grandson is going to be removed from me. Because he's going to remove your grandson. Now, why does it say your grandson? Yasir, he will remove your grandson. Why doesn't it say ki sasir? She will remove your grandson. So you see that only when he is non-Jewish and your daughter is the Jew, then we're afraid he will remove your grandson from being Jewish, right? Yasir bincha means your grandchild, and he will remove your grandchild from being Jewish because he himself is not Jewish. But L'sasir, we're not afraid she will remove your grandchild because it won't be your grandson, because your son's child is not going to be Jewish anyhow, so she's not removing him. He never was Jewish to begin with. That's the way Rashi learns. And then Tosfos says, if that's the case, so what do we say? Shmamina. Here we can learn that your grandson, the son of your daughter, is considered Jewish. Of course, that's the whole limud. That is the basis of the limud. What is the extra shmamina? That's what Tosfos asks the question. And therefore, Tosfos learns a different shot. Tosfos learns it doesn't mean ki yasir es bincha, that your son-in-law, will remove your grandson who is a Jew from being Jewish, and help him stray. But rather it means the in-laws. Your ki yasir es bincha means your son's father-in-law will remove him from being Jewish. That's the concern. Ki yasir es bincha. Now, the question is, why is it? Well, and why does he only say, that's what Tosfos learns, so why does it only say we're afraid he's going to remove your son? What about the next generations? So you see the next generation is not Jewish. The only concern is that your son, married to his non-Jewish daughter, the father-in-law will make him stray. And it doesn't say ki sasir, and that she will remove, which is the removal of the daughter-in-law. That's the Rabbeinu Tam's shot, And to that, it says that Reed did not like that. Reed did not understand it that way. Because Ki Yasir is Mashma Sar Mesh Kadosh Baruch Hu. He will remove him not from you, but from Hashem. Ariyati Yasem, as he said, because the pasuk, the Targum says he will make him straight against Hakadosh Baruch Hu, away from Hakadosh Baruch Hu. Yeah. So therefore it doesn't seem like he's going to make him not be Jewish, but rather not live as a Jew. So we have a machlekas over here, and Tessus has it, brings another two pshatim in a way. It is weird how we see it. The Gemara tells us that we learn from Ki Yasir as Bincha that it counts as your child only if the mother is Jewish and not the father is Jewish, or when Rashi learns, or from the fact that it says he will remove your son, it tells us that there is no grandson to remove, there is no next generation. And now we have a machlokas. We know the source for for matrilineal descent, for being Jewish, that the mother is what defines what is Jewish. But we have a machlokas in Rashi places of the basis of where we see it in this pasuk, and where we learn it from. Now, the second shot in the Gemara is that really that they are Jewish. It's not that they only had only Jewish men had children, Jewish women didn't have children, and therefore they were all non-Jews, and that's why Hillel and the Amalek had to convert. But rather, there was a by definition they were no longer Jewish, and this brings us. This is a Indian in halacha. The Gemara brings it in Menachos, and we learn this in Shulchan Aruch. We have such halacha. When somebody is a meshumah, somebody converts to another religion, he's a Jew, but there's a certain process of geirus that they would do to come back. Now, not a proper geirus in the same sense as conversion, where it's a non-Jew becoming a Jew, and a Yehuda becoming a Yehuda, because that is a proper change. But over here, even though they were a born Jew, but since they converted, they went into another religion, they need to go through, and they would go to a mikveh, and there was a certain Kabbalas mitzvahs of chaver. The Gemara over there says that there's a Kabbalas mitzvah chaveris, but there is such a thing, a meshumah, somebody who went out with the Zorah and then comes back, that there's a certain process of going to the mikveh and coming back as a yid. So even though we know that Yisrael, that a yid, even though that he sins, again, we always a part of children of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. We have that relationship regardless, but nevertheless, to reintegrate the Klal Yisrael, there's a certain level, and a certain level they are completely out, and then there's a need to come back, and that's what it says. Bashem bagadu, kibanim zarim yilad. Bashem bagadu means that at this point it's a complete begida. There's a rejection and a rebellion against the Kadosh Baruch Hu, and as a result of that, there's a coming back to Klal Yisrael that is needed in this gerus, and so in this pshat, Hilni Amalka may have been Jewish to begin with, but nevertheless needed to go through to a gerus in order to come back into Klal Yisrael. Maybe she couldn't prove it anyhow, so she needed to be suffix. But the concept, even though, as Rashi says, that at least 50% were Jewish, or the majority were Jewish, but nevertheless, she would have had to have come back and do a gerus, she and her sons and Munabaz, on account of, because they are already in this level of detachment. You have a question, Max?
Yeah. Is the I didn't do the Tosfos on the side, but does it come out according to the read that if either parent's not Jewish, then the kids are non-Jews?
No. Why would you say that?
Because I thought you were saying that, I mean, I didn't do it inside, so maybe I didn't follow totally, but I thought you were saying that the way he learns the diak of Kisasir is that the Kisasir is Pincha, he's going to make your child, whatever, go astray, but not your grandkids, because your grandkids are already gone. That's what I thought you were explaining, the way he...
Yeah, but that's Kiyasir. Only he would, but not she. And it's still the same drasha. You're just saying that Kiyasir doesn't mean make him not Jewish, but makes him turn away from Hashem. There are two ways of learning here. It doesn't mean he will make your child not Jewish, which is the way it seems Rabbi Tam was learning. Kiyasir is Bincha because he'll make your child not Jewish. Or does it mean no? Kiyasir means it is your child and he will lead him astray away from Hashem, which is the way Rashi is learning, and Ri is explaining that that's more correct in the pasuk. In other words, the way Rashi says it like this: she, we're not concerned she'll take your child away from Yiddishkeit, because in any case he's not born a Jew.
Yeah.
He, we're concerned he will take your child away from Torah because it's your daughter, and so therefore the grandchild's Jewish, and this will remove, and she will remove him and lead him astray away from Hashem, and he's a Jew. Got it?
No, I get Rashi's pshat. Just in the way that you were saying at the read that Kiyasir is talking about the father-in-law.
Yeah, that's in Rabbeinu Tam, and Ri's arguing on Rabbeinu Tam.
Oh, Rabbeinu Tam, fine, that's why. So
Rabbeinu Tam says that Ri is arguing on Rabbeinu Tam and says that doesn't fit. Okay.
Did everyone come out that the same, like halakha l'maisa? Does everyone come out the same?
Yeah, everybody holds that a mother makes a child Jewish, a father does not. However, there is one akud over here that we mentioned last week in places, and we have in the Gemara over here that there's a tzad, that there's a possibility that would say that even if the mother is not Jewish, if the father is a mamzer, the child would have the mamzerus, which doesn't apply to a non-Jew, but it would apply to him. So that much the father can give over to the son, to the child, as in that way there is a certain aspect of yichus to the father, even if the mother's not Jewish. That part would say. Okay, with this we complete the Chamisha Sanashim. As hopefully you've seen the Gemara, and now we're going to start the second parak. The case of the second parak is Eishes Achshalei Ba'olam, and the question in really that the mission is asking is Ketzad. What is that case? Because it is distinct from all the other arayas that we have. Why is it distinct from all the other arayas that we had? We had many arayas mentioned in the previous Mishnah, in the previous parak. And the Gemara doesn't ask, Ketzad, what's the scenario? How does that work? Because in all the others, it's clear. They are an erva at the moment, the whole time, from the beginning to the end of the Yevamot process, in the marriage of the previous husband. They are erva to the brother. Here, the erva is becoming at a later state. It's becoming an erva on account of some mistake. It was some lack of process in the Yevamot. But really, it's a regular yavam like any of the other brothers. Simply because of an exemption in the Torah to Yevamot, therefore there's an erva. So the Gemara asks, since it's so distinct, what's the case? So the case is that you have two brothers, and one of them is married. So Reuven is married and to Sarah, and Reuven dies, and now Shimon is the only Yavam because he's the only brother. Subsequent to the death of Reuven, Levi is born, a brother. The father, Reuven and Shimon's father, has a child. Levi, they name him Levi. Now, this Levi is born after the death of Reuven. So they were never together in the same world. As the Torah says, as we saw at the beginning of the Masechta, and the Gemara is going to say on the base, Ki yeshvu achim yachdav. They have to live in the world at the same time. And Reuven and Levi were never alive together. And since they were never alive together, Shimon does Yibum. And when Shimon does Yibum with Sarah, and Sarah becomes Shimon's wife, even after Shimon dies, Levi cannot do Yibum because there's already a prohibition with Sarah, the erva, from the first moment. So it's a Eshes Ach. It's Reuven's wife. But since they were never together in the same world, the mitzvah of Yibum never happened. So right here, prior to Shimon doing Yibum to Sarah, Levi becomes Aser and Sarah. This is distinct from a case that we're going to see later, where Shimon first did Yibum with Sarah, and then Levi was born. Okay? Our case over here is talking about Reuven dies, Levi's born, Shimon does Yibum. That means there was a moment that Levi was obligated in Yibum to Reuven, and to Reuven's wife, but wasn't allowed to, and therefore there was an erva. The next possible case is where Reuven dies, Shimon marries Sarah in Yibum, and then Levi's born. So here you have an interesting case where Levi was never had the opportunity even for Yibum of Reuven's wife, because Shimon already did Yibum prior to Levi being born. There's a machlekes with Rav Shimon and the Chachamim whether or not at this point do we say it's Eshach Shalei B'Lamei, or do we say no, there never was a Yibum possible and therefore it never became prohibited. So this is the case of Eshach Shalei B'Lamei. And the case of the Tzara is where Shimon has a second wife as well. And now since Levi's not, when Shimon dies, since Levi's not allowed to do Yibum with Tzara, because that was the wife of Reuven without the mitzvah of Yibum, because it was Shalei Ba'Lamai, so to Rivka is going to be the Tzara of this erva and is not allowed to do Yibum. Clear? So let's just stop this share. The definition of Eshes HaShalei B'Lamei, it gets into the basis of what is Zika and Yibum. So we have over here the Reuven dies. The wife of Reuven, and then Levi is born. Levi, really, there was never a Zika to Levi. Levi was born, but it was never. There was never a transfer to Levi. When Reuven's marriage is over, it never transferred to Levi. Levi wasn't even alive yet. So really, what we should say is there is no Yibum, there is no Zika. However, Rashi says over here, look, different Masal Rishayna, Zui Eshes Reuven Shenafla Lefanav Kvar Pamachas. Nafla Lefanav Kvar Pamachas means in the first Zika, in the first possibility of Yibum, there was a Zika. Nafla Lefanav, she fell before him, meaning she was transferred over from Reuven's death to him as an infant brother the moment he was born, even though he wasn't alive at the moment of Zika. Now we spoke about this when we talk about Zika, and we said that any time that the Gemara says that any time there is no, at the moment of Misa, there's no Nefila, then there's no Zika, then there's no Yibum. Over here, at the moment that Reuven died, there was no brother alive, and yet we see that the Zika, that there's a Nefila, the marriage of Reuven is transferred over to this brother, only that there's a prohibition. Uh, uh, so we have here, Rav Nachum said of Vard that it's not a Patur in Yibum. There's an Isser of Yibum. There's an Isser Yibum. It has a lot of ramifications in the sugya of Eshes HaShalei V'Alama. But the idea is that Eshes HaShalei V'Alama is not it's not a Patur in Yibum. There's a transfer of the marriage. There's a zika. In a certain sense, there's a zika going on. It's only that even though there was a zika, there's isser on making a yibum. The Torah said that there's an isser making a yibum because he wasn't there, and therefore there's a block in the yibum. And therefore Rashi says the second time when Shimon dies, this is the second time that this woman has fallen to him. Once in the first Zika and once in the second Zika. There is a Zika at the first time as well. And then this is the second time it fell on a Zika. And therefore we have a concept that this child, this infant, already has an Issa Erva, because the Eshes Ach prohibition it exists here because the Torah forbid the Yibum, and since the Torah forbid the Yibum, the Zika is there, but it can't be done, and there's a Isser. And that also makes sense why it asers the tzara. If it's simply an exemption that, look, you weren't alive at the same time, so you can't do the Yibum. So then why is there a Patur tzara? The Patur tzara shouldn't exist there, just like it doesn't exist, we saw earlier. An island is called Eshes Ach Damamela. It's the brother's wife just on its own. That's not going to be enough to create a Patur for the tzara. It has to be that there's a Isser Yibum. There's an Isser Erva. So that's what we see over here. This is where I'm not saying that we see that it's actually there's a Zika. And actually, there's a mitzvah over here, but the Eshes Ach is a new chiddush that the Torah says that is an erva that cannot go. Tosfos over here asks a question. Tosfos asks, why do I need a special limud to say that Eshes Ach Shalei V'Alama is going to be aser? Why don't we say that it should be aser because this is Tosfos at the top of your Zionim base. Let's say the Torah's ways are dachina. It has to be pleasant. And this is not pleasant. What's not pleasant about this? So Tosfos says we see this is an exemption elsewhere as well. Where's the exemption? Where a child is born the original deceased brother had a child born, and then the child died. That's going to remain an exemption for Yibum. So Reuven had a child, the child died, there's no Yibum. Why? But he has no children alive. So anyone else says, no, it cannot be that there's a mitzvah because it's unpleasant. What's the unpleasantness? Because if the child later dies, so imagine, Reuven has a wife, Sarah. Reuven dies, but he has a child. So Sarah says, great, I'm not a Yevoma. I go and she goes and she gets married. She gets married to some guy, some not related. And then the child dies. All of a sudden, she now has to, in the middle of her marriage, get chalitza from the brother of her first husband, because now retroactively there was a mitzvah of Yibum. Or maybe even further. Not only does she need chalitza, maybe she has to divorce this new husband because she wasn't allowed to marry him and go back and do Yibum. Or maybe she can't get married until she knows for sure that this child is old enough to and has his own children, and then she knows for sure we have 2 generations already, so she can get married. These would be unpleasant ways. So it's not the rachea dachina. And so too over here. Imagine Reuven dies. Shimon, and he doesn't have any brothers. The Yevomos is going to want to get married. She's going to say, "I'm sorry, I can't get married because maybe my father-in-law, my ex-father-in-law, is going to have another child, and then later on there's going to be a mitzvah." Right? So retroactively, the newborn brother-in-law, 10 years down the road, is going to have a mitzvah sibum, create a new mitzvah sibum. And that's going to retroactively, she's going to be married, she's going to have to divorce or get chalitza or get yibum, or worse, wait for this kid to grow up. We see Naomi says that to Ruth, right? Even if I become pregnant now, what's going to happen? You're going to wait for this kid, right? That's the Rocher Dachinam. It's not pleasant. Tosis earlier and other Rishonim bring this, that say, look, over here it could be different. Maybe there's already another brother, so she's not waiting for that guy for the newborn anyhow. It could also, right? So, in any case, Tosis asks, it should be Rocher Dachinam. So what I need a pasuk, the Kasach Mana, what I need a pasuk, after all, it's not the Rachel Dachanim. Ikre legufe itzach. I'm gonna read the itzach leheche the chamoisa sheyavama muberes the avashape the Rachel Dachanim the tamtin shemateilit zachav v'tavas kuka. He says, well, maybe it's Dachinam. You can't indefinitely wait. Maybe there's going to be a brother-in-law. That's Derech Dachinam. It's not nice. But maybe she's pregnant. Maybe he should wait. Look, now that she's pregnant, maybe it's going to be a boy, and wait for that as well. That's why I need a pasuk to tell you, no, it's not going to be Yibum anyhow. Now, the Rush. Really, there's a hakira that we can have in this question of where it would have been a lack of derechel dachinah, right? So it would have been a yibum. What would have been the obligation of this yibum? There's no one alive. How did we define a yibum? Yibum is there's a zika. What did we say the zika is? Reuven dies. His marriage, normally a person's marriage ends when they die. Here, the marriage continues, and the brother can receive, it's passed on to the brother. But if there's no brother, so how can there even be a mitzvah yibum? How can there even be something to say that there's going to be a need for Torah Darchel Dachanam? There's no transit, there's no secret because there's no one to be there. The way the Rosh explains this, what we see is, I think this Rav Nachum explains this as well. What we see is that he holds that actually it's not that when the brother dies, the zika passes on to the next brother, because over here there is no next brother in Eshes Achash Lev. But rather, the marriage is never completely, if he died without children, because of the need to reestablish that home, that marriage never really ended. The marriage never really ended, and it needs to somehow be continued. And so there's a havamina that the child born later, so he's going to have to pick up that marriage. I'm not finding the rush quickly right now. I want to get to Zika and the next point. But that's the Vart of Rav Nachum and the Chakira over here. That it's not that Zika works in that it's a transfer to the brother. It's that the marriage never really ended. Who does it transfer to? Where does it go? It can't be up in the air, and so it goes to the brother. But it would be up in the air until that brother comes. That would have been the havamina of what's going on. So again, the Gemara in Kedushin says that marriage ends b'misa or get, right? But in this case, misa, death is what ends a marriage. And in a case where where the man dies childless, then that marriage did not completely end, and that would continue going over to one of the brothers, whichever brother picks that up, and yibum. And if there's no brother alive, then it could also happen. And that's why I need the Torah to tell me that it doesn't work, because the Derech Hanam would tell me only in as much as that it's not nice to make a wait, but the marriage never ended. The marriage never ended, so when he's born, he can pick it up. Rabbi Chanan explains over here, what's the question, Derech Hanam? It's not nice. Yeah, but that's what the Torah said. There's a mitzvah. What do you mean not nice? Is it an exemption? Derech Hanam is an exemption. Look, it has to be nice. So Rabbi Chanan says, no. It allows for us to understand what the meaning of the Torah could have been. It defines for us that there never was such a mitzvah to begin with. He proves it from Esra, Daled Minim. The Gemara asks, well, maybe this is an Esrog, maybe that's an Esrog, and one of the things is the prickly fruit. And the Gemara says, no, the Torah could never have given that mitzvah. It says that's not an exemption. It's not saying, look, yes, that is it. One of the meaning, that is a meaning of Esrog. It's just simply that you don't do it because it's not nice. The Torah tells us that that's not what the Torah ever could have meant. And same here, even though the marriage never ended, and therefore, because he died childless, and therefore it's still out there hovering, as it were. And when the new brother is born, he could pick that up. Derech would have told me, no, that can't be. That can't be, because then it would be an indefinite wait for maybe there's a brother, and therefore there's Derech tells me that cannot be the meaning of the mitzvah of Yibum at all. The Gemara had asked a possibility of maybe we learn from Lot, Achim, that a nephew would also be in the mitzvah of Yibum. It's an interesting thing because we do find that actually, and an uncle, a nephew, because Boaz did that. It means the idea over here is that, of course, in the concept of that, the marriage of someone who died childless never really ends because because it was unfulfilled, as it were. Even though the mitzvah cannot be, the mitzvah of the Torah is only on the brother to reestablish it. But conceptually, that concept is still there. For someone else to be goyal, to redeem that family, to redeem that household, be Karal Shemoy, at least give some sort of redemption or ending or really continuation of that marriage, which really never ended in Nisa. Because essentially what we just saw is that even though generally Nisa ends a marriage, but if it's childless, so it never was fulfilled, it still has that potential unfulfilled, that continues a certain way, and Boaz could step in, and that's so the Gemara had a Havamina from Lot that we would learn that even not only a literal brother, but even a nephew would also count in the mitzvah. This brings us to Zika. We're not going to be able to get through Zika. We'll just start it with the concepts of Zika, and hopefully learn more next week. We'll go into Zika more. We're going to get into a lot of the practical of the halachas of what Zika is. The first thing to notice is in Rashi. Rashi in the final of the Gemara. So the Gemara says, Amar Rahuna Amarav Shemeres Yavna Shamesa Muta Be'ima. Shemeres Yavna died, is allowed to marry her mother, even though that there was Zika, meaning even though that she was a Shemeres Yavna, meaning that she was essentially transferred over to him in marriage, and so therefore Now, he now is engaged to this woman, and she died. So he should be outside of the mother. No, it's permissible in the mother. Alma kasavar ein zika. So we see he holds no zika. So the pashut way of reading that Gemara would be ein zika. He holds up this no zika, meaning that when Reuven dies and he has a surviving brother, he does not transfer over the marriage to the brother, to Shimon. Ein zika. There is no transfer of thing. He's not zakak la. He doesn't make her obligated in this. There's no zika. That's what the simple reading is. But if we look at Rashi, the first Rashi of ein zika, zikas yevimte shamesa. The zika. Rashi is denying what the Gemara says. The Gemara says ein zika. Rashi says no, the zika that exists. It's not strong enough to be like an arusa, to be a marriage, to be a betrothal. What Rashi is saying is, when the Gemara says ein zika, it does not mean ein zika. When the Gemara says ein zika, it means there is zika. Zika, by definition, has to be that is the structure of yibum. That the kiddushay rishayna, the kiddusha of the first husband, never really ended, and is therefore in transfer and hovering, waiting for somebody to pick it up, one of the brothers to pick it up. However, that zika that does exist is not strong enough to be counted as erusin. Normally, we'd say in order for a marriage to prohibit all the relatives of that wife would have to be that there is erusin. He said, "Arei at mekudeshes." There is a proper kiddushin. There is a designation of this woman with this man. Now, he become as a part of that. He may not marry her mother and her sister and her daughter, etc. Those are her immediate relatives. He's not allowed to marry them. That's the erusin. Zika also is acting in a certain way like erusin. It's a betrothal, because the previous brother's kiddushin is transferred over and goes over to this surviving brother or one of the surviving brothers. However, ein zika means not that there's no zika, because that's the whole mechanism of kiddushin of yibum. Of course, there's a zika. Rashi's denying the words of the Gemara. That doesn't mean that there's no zika. There has to be zika. Rather, what it means is zika that does exist, the transfer of the kiddushin, the kiddushin of the brother that never ended and is going over to whoever is going to do yibum, is, however, not strong enough to make it like a real erusin, like a real betrothal, like a real kiddushin, and therefore the immediate relatives would not be us. But it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. It means it's just that zika which is there is not strong enough to transfer, and that's we see, and we'll see plenty of this. And now, as we're going to get into zika from next week, we're going to see that there are many halachas that pertain to the previous marriage and pertain to the connection to the previous marriage, and isurim and heterim. There's a lamashal of a kohen. So she can eat. If he's a kohen, she can eat truma midaraisa. The Rabbanan say that she can't, but midaraisa she can eat truma. Why can she eat truma? She's not married to her previous husband because he's dead, and ein zika tells me he's not allowed to. She's not married to the new husband, so she's not Eishes kohen. So what I needed the Rabbanan, or of course she can't eat truma. So Rashi is saying that we see that the structure of this marriage of Yibum, by definition, must be that she is bound by the original kiddushin, which is still there and in place. And even the man Omar that says in zika is going to hold that there is zika. When the Gemara says ein zika, only means in as much as we're trying to say how strong on the barometer of kiddushin, in the kiddushin barometer, how strong of a kiddushin already exists, not enough to prohibit the relatives. But of course, it has to exist and continue to exist, and that's the definition of Kiddushin. That's what we saw. That's what Eishes Hashavua Lama is the base is based upon. We didn't really get a chance to see by Asa Maimer or the Maimer. What is this Maimer? Miktas the Rabbanon. Rashi says because all Maimer is a Rabbanon Kiddushin, but there's already a Zika. There's a Daraisa Kiddushin already in place. The structure of all of the sugya, we've seen this multiple times already. We talked about this in the whole Masechta. But here, when we get to Zika, this first Rashi is the Pesach. It's really the opening to understanding the mitzvah of Zika, of the concept of Zika. That really there's Kiddushin there that transfers to the brother, and it remains in place. It's only not strong enough for the mitzvah of Zika. And therefore, it's strong enough for mitzvah. It's not strong enough to aser the relatives. So the Gemara now says, so if that's the case, so just say the halacha is ein zika, the halacha is yesh zika. So the Gemara says, no, I would have thought that it's only bechad, even bechad or only bechad, meaning in this too is a pella. If you understand ein zika, how can there be a distinction between whether it's one brother or two brothers? Ein zika means when the brother died, there is no Kiddushin transferring over. So here we see, of course, the concept of zika has to be there, and therefore there's a Manda Amar that says, and the Gemara has a Havamin, I would think, that if there's only one surviving brother, of course he's usher in the relatives. Because since Zika really does exist, everybody agrees Zika exists, meaning Zika, that this woman is bound to the surviving brother. There is a marriage to the surviving brother. Now, if there are two brothers, which one? So you can't say each one of them is prohibited in the relatives because it's a weak connection, because to each one, I don't even know if it's going to happen. But if there's one surviving, so now, and the Gemara says, I have a Havamina that and there is an opinion like that to that one, there is going to be Zika. Now, what's the logic? If you hold Ein Zika by two, why would you hold a Zika by one? After all, the brother died and his marriage ended. And there is no Zika. You have to start a new mitzvah, a new marriage. And so until that marriage was done, until there was a Yibum, why would you be usher in the relatives? So again, we see this concept that Rashi is saying, and that's why there is a Havamin in one. That, of course, Zika always exists. Everybody agrees Zika exists. And when Reuven died, Shimon, and there's only one surviving brother, Shimon is going to absorb and inherit. He's going to yarshim that marriage because there's only one anyhow. So he has to be the one. And therefore, even before he did Yibum, he's going to be usher in her immediate relatives.
You don't necessarily have to say like Rashi you see the same idea in Rashi as you're saying now, but like you don't have to say the idea of ulme, that like there's a koach of the zika, that you could have understood why there's a zika dafka by one and not by two, even without Rashi's mahalach of that, there's like a kochos of zika of ulme, that like that there is a zika, but it's just not strong enough. I mean, like you could have understood it without, not like Rashi, that let's say of course there's a zika, but perhaps just there's bechlal no zika at all when there's two brothers, because it can't go to like a divide, like can't go here, so maybe there's nothing, right? Meaning Rashi's adding. How
do you define zika then? What is zika?
Let's say you would say, like you've been saying, that it's a continuation of the brother's marriage, but that continuation of the marriage can only be between one man and one woman. When there's multiple men, then it can't go anywhere, and it just goes away.
It goes away. Where'd it go? And when the one brother then decides that the one that does do Yibum, how did he inherit it? Where's his Kiddushin? The Gemara, he doesn't need to make a Kiddushin. And the Gemara says, why doesn't he have to make a kiddushin? Because he already has a kiddushin.
Yeah, but then you're not proving it. I mean, if you're working with the assumption that the entire mahosa, I mean, if you're saying that by definition there always has to be a zika, then yeah, there always has to be a zika. But I'm just saying that if there's luyitzer, there's a shaykhis that there could be an actual situation where there's literally no zika, but there's still a mitzvah of yibum. So
how did the kiddushin happen? That's the problem. If you hold no zika, meaning if you're going to learn ein zika to mean that there actually is no zika, the marriage of the first brother ended. So where is the kiddushin of the new marriage? In
a chanami. So then you don't need to bring any rayas from here. I mean, if that's your logic, then you never need to prove zika. I mean, if your logic is that there can never ever be a mitzvah of yibum without zika, because then where's the kiddushin? So then you never ever need to prove that there's a zika, because by definition there always must be zika always. And then you would never have a havmi that ain't zika. I mean, you don't need to spend all the time like this is all just nice like extra and bonuses to say, yeah, I can prove from Rashi that it's also true, but you're the way you're setting it up, and structurally, it's literally impossible for there ever to be non-zika.
I'm not saying it's impossible. We're going to need to address many issues. That's what I'm saying. Yes, it's true that there could be a simple reading of ein zika. There is no zika.
Okay, so answer. Right?
But then we're going to have to answer a whole bunch of questions, because as the Gemara we saw earlier already, the Gemara addressed, is kedusha rishonim mapeles or misa mapeles? Right. What do you mean? There's not kedusha rishonim as mapeles. The original marriage that Reuven 20 years ago made and said ariyat makudeshesli, that's what's mapeles to the second brother. How can it be? Like what would be the logic? So in Rashi it makes sense. If you're going to learn not like Rashi, so we're going to have to address and say, okay, what is the mechanism of yibum that is relying on the kiddushin mapeles of the first, of 20 years ago, the first marriage to the first brother, and yet because there are 3 surviving brothers, there is no zika, so there is no continuation of that marriage. So how did the mahapala happen? I'm not saying that there couldn't be a pshat, but we would have to address those.
Okay.
You're right. I'm showing it that Rashi got, that Rashi says it here, but Rashi didn't make it up just because he decided, you know what, the Gemara said ain't zika, but probably means yesh zika, just not strong enough. Rashi's coming from the whole sugya, the whole mesechta of Yevomos. Yevomos screams out from the beginning to the end that there is a zika. The brother's marriage binds the woman, the original marriage binds the woman to continue the marriage until there's an establishment of the home.
So Lutzer, you have
Rashi to say it must not mean the simple meaning of the words. I'm just giving you what pushed Rashi into such a doichak in the simple reading of the Gemara.
Yeah, I was just saying that let's imagine that somehow we answer all those kashas and we can come up with some situation where their taka is like a shita that holds ein zika means literally no zika, right? So that manda amar, that potential opinion would have no problem explaining why you could have zika in bechad and ein zika betray. I mean, you could create such a structure. Then once you're willing to stomach the idea that you could have a situation where there's bechlal no zika, right? So then that doesn't mean that there can't be zika, right? I mean, if you're willing to accept that there could be a situation where there's no zika and yet somehow yibum can work and kedushin, all that stuff, you solve all those issues. So you figured out how to solve all those issues, then you could, in theory, construct a shita very easily that would say, but there could be zika, but you don't need it. So that zika is there, it keeps the bond going. That exists when there's one brother. It doesn't exist when there's 2 brothers.
Either way, we're going to have to limit the meaning of ein zika. We're going to have to limit the meaning of ein zika, saying, oh, there really is zika, but if there are multiple brothers, so there's no one to hand it off to, so it dissipates and dies. But that means yesh zika, and it falls apart. Either way, we're going to have to, when we say ein zika, we're going to have to say yesh zika, but there's an asterisk, right, as opposed to Ein Zika. You're also saying, no, what it means is Yesh Zika, and the marriage ended, and it was handed over to a brother. But since there are 5 brothers, which one are we handing it over to? There's no one, it's undefined, and so therefore it dies. Right? That's what you're saying.
Yeah, but that would be the mandamar yesh zika b'chad in betray. We also see a mandamar that holds in zika afilu b'chad.
Of course.
So that one, in theory, could hold there's literally no zika ever.
Of course, but the Gemara was trying to say in that manda amar,
right,
there would be a chiluk between one and the other. If he holds that there is no such concept of zika, if there is no concept of zika, so where's the Gemara even thinking there should be a chiluk between one echad and trey? There is no zika. Why would there be a zika b'chad? That's showing the Gemara in trying to do that. See, the Gemara understands, of course there is a zika, just that zika somehow has limits. And that's what the Gemara is saying. You understand what I'm saying? Otherwise, the Gemara should never have gone to that there's a chiluk between chad and trey. There's no zika. No,
Okay.
the Gemara understood there is a zika. Just zika has limits. Now the Gemara is trying to figure out those limits.